how our current environment affects our mental health. Because we're raised to grow up and doing certain kind of things, going to school, going to college, going to the office. People do that for decades and decades and decades, and obviously that has an impact on the mental health of everyone that's doing this.
Let's start with the environmental side of things, right? Number one, your neurotransmitters, the things that are going to keep you happy, the things that are going to keep mental health in check, are mainly three neurotransmitters: dopamine, noradrenaline, and adrenaline, or epinephrine and norepinephrine. They go by a couple different names. And the dopamine is probably the main one, right? Because that's going to be things that give you fulfillment, almost like you want more of that. And that's not a hard thing to understand, especially with concept of social media and dopamine chasing and things of that nature, of just the screens, whether it could be pornography, anything that elicits a dopamine response makes you want to come back for more. This could even go to food. But the problem is, if you do not engage in just outdoors, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be sunlight, because there's a couple different ways to get dopamine from your amino acids. But the main one is sunlight. The secondary one is cold exposure. Both of those create dopamine in abundance in the brain. So essentially, you're making that dopamine from melanin. And when you do that, you have a surplus of dopamine. So now that dopamine seeking behavior is less impactful on the brain, right? Like mental health from a depression standpoint. But if you are not making dopamine from your melanin naturally, then the only behaviors that create dopamine for you are these dopamine seeking behaviors, which make it hard to function sometimes. And eventually you run a deficit. You run a deficit of the ability to make dopamine. And that's when things like depression comes in. Now like, people are like, okay, well, is there a real life example of this? And there is. Seasonal depressive disorder, right? Yeah. And with the brain. But it really is the lack of sunlight in the summertime that leads to the wintertime having the depression effect. Because if you get enough melanin when the sun is strong, you can essentially trade that for dopamine when the sun is gone, right? Now, if you happen to live somewhere where it's sunny all the time, you won't experience that ever, because you always have some kind of background, even if it's mild, 1 hour or two that you might spend outside. That's enough to keep that system running. But in the winter, say you live in Canada or New York or something like that, most people in those regions, they wake up and it's dark, and they get home from work and it's dark. Yeah. They never get any sunlight. And at that point, you're running a bigger deficit. But if you were to gain plenty of melanin during the summer months, there's a systems in place that keep that in storage so that you can continue to use it when the sun is gone. And so that's a major thing in terms of mental health and the current environment of how work works in the modern world, in first world countries, right? Because a lot of people are indoors.
So how would it affect someone? Because most people that work in offices don't spend time outside. They wake up, they go to the office, spend all time indoors. By the time they come out, it's almost dark already, and then they probably get indoors again. And that's year round for decades. So how does that affect your mental health over years and years and years without sun exposure, cold exposure, and the things that produce dopamine that allow you to stay happy?
Yeah. So essentially what ends up happening is you run a deficit, right? You run a deficit of your melanin sheets in your body. So what at first it leads just a little bit less drive, right? So you're less likely to venture out and start your own business. You're less likely to take risks. You're just less likely to, it's almost as if it's planned that way, because it makes you a better submissive employee, right? It's essentially at that point, because you can't think for yourself. When dopamine gets lowered, you can't think for yourself very much. Dopamine is not just let me explain a little bit about dopamine and why it's so important to preserve your ability to make it. Dopamine is not just your feel-good hormone, and also is a pattern recognition hormone. In fact, most people don't know this, but dopamine is heavily involved in your calf muscles, which is why we're bipedal, because the coordination of your calves, like your calves and your Achilles tendon, are what keep you upright. It's that simple. So that muscle group and those tendons and ligaments and the nerves that integrate there need to be able to coordinate, not just moving you around, but balance of where your head and movement are going and things of that nature. So dopamine is used heavily in coordination behaviors, not just in the brain, but also in your physical body. So you actually end up being a less athletic, less ability to recognize trends in other people's behavior and your own behavior, and trends in motor pattern recognition. So overall, the ability to make dopamine is essentially the ability to stay human as a apex predator on this planet, right? Whether you consider yourself an apex predator or not is irrelevant. That's our clad, right? We've essentially dominated every other species on this planet. And the thing that gives us that ability is large amounts of dopamine that we can make in our brain from our own melanin, right? And so over a decade, you essentially become less of that, right? Whatever you want to entail, less assertive, less ability to think and coordinate with other people. And that's essentially out of their employees. They want somebody that just follows the rules and shows up to work every day, goes home every day, don't ask questions, just keep doing it. And that is what that does. It's kind of a self-feeding mechanism. The more you spend time indoors, the more you're going to just do what they tell you to do.
Yeah, I want to get your opinion here, because this is a very interesting topic, right? We can get into the conspiracy theories a little bit. So do you think, because a lot of this seems to have happened by accident, right? We have the blue lights, we have the office, we have the 9 to 5. It's like the way it has been. But do you think this happened by accident, or do you think this was planned in a way so that would, the people in power make a more submissive population that are easy to control, that are easier to exploit, and that are, easy to just tell them what to do?
Honestly, I think it's planned, right? So, and I'm not saying just I think it's planned. There is evidence that it's planned, right? So let's think about it this way, right? The Industrial Revolution happened in, post World War II, right? So in the 1940s, 1950s, right? That is when people started actively working indoors in factories and started working shift work / 24 hours, okay? And so what they found is when you use normal candlelight, normal incandescents, right? And so because those don't disturb your circadian rhythm. And we talked a little bit about this in the previous podcast, where lights that are absent of blue light are helpful for your circadian rhythm. So they found that, hey, it's just not that productive. People were not productive working a night shift when the lights were that tight. So that's when they started to move to fluorescent light bulbs and compact fluorescents and things of that nature. They have way more blue in them. And they found, productivity goes up because their brains think that it's daytime. And so boom, now all of a sudden we can work 24 hours. And that probably was a fluke at first, until there was some medical through the Rockefeller Foundation, some medical scientific research into the leptomelanocortin pathway, which is what governs pretty much your whole metabolism as a mammal. That's all mammals, not just humans. That's all mammals have this pathway that's inherently tied to light, because all mammals are either diurnal, they are very linked to diurnal or nocturnal sequences, depending on the mammal. And that pathway has a lot to do with the type of light they interact with. Long story short, the light bulbs have been changing on purpose to be more and more blue light dominant, even to the point where the latest change happened in 2000, I want to say it was 2004 or 2003, when Obama passed a bill that declared incandescent light bulbs no longer acceptable to be manufactured in America. You had to start to move to LED light bulbs, which are the worst, by the way. They are the worst because they only have blue. Now they made this change in the concept of energy efficientness, right? And so, which is true, right? A blue light bulb is way more energy efficient than a red light bulb or a yellow light bulb because it has shorter wavelengths. That's how they passed the bill. But they knew at that point what it does. Let's put it that way. At that point, there was plenty of research out that the melanopsin receptor, which is in your eye, in your brain, and in your skin, reacts very aggressively to blue light in terms of keeping you awake. Now, how do we stay awake, right? I mentioned that dopamine, adrenaline, and noradrenaline are key neurotransmitters. They get upregulated when sunlight comes out. And under natural circumstances, that's the only time when blue light exists. It's paired with red and orange and all the others, but that's the only time we physically see it under natural conditions. That is the key wavelength of light that this melanopsin receptor is keying in on to produce, because it goes, oh, if there's UV light, aka UVA, UVB, and blue light, then we're making melanin, right? And if we're making melanin, that means we can also stand a chance to make an excess of, when you use only blue, there's no UVA and no UVB. So you're not making melanin, but you're still sending the signal to the brain, hey, let's dump a lot of this melanin into dopamine, adrenaline, and noradrenaline, but you're not restoring the main bucket, the melanin, right? And so essentially, they know, hey, we're making people more productive, but if they don't get outside, eventually they run a dopamine deficit. And now, guess what you can do? You can get people addicted to just about anything. Wow. Right now, there are, now, if you think about this, why is that a good thing? Right now, we know that the U.S. government has actively participated in taking drugs into the country, right? That's a thing that we know is documented, that they participated with Mexican cartels to deliver cocaine and crack and all of that type of stuff into America. So are they above getting American people addicted to things? No, they're definitely not. So then you got to think, okay, so what makes the government the most amount of money? And we live in a debt-based society. They need to sell you something, right? In other words, you need to be buying stuff all the time in order for the economy to work. If you happen to be a saver, they don't want you. They don't want you to be a saver. They want you to be a spender, right? And so that means that if you run somebody into a low dopamine state and you show them anything, literally anything, on a screen, on a blue lit screen, they're going to be attracted to that. It could be a trend for a new diet. It could be a trend for a new video game. It could be anything. They're going to want it because the screen is providing the dopamine hit, and then they're providing the thing they want you to buy on the other end, right? And it literally could be anything. And so that way they can drive a spending economy, even when you don't really have money, right? Like when you're low dopamine, you don't think about, oh, I need this money for that and that money for this. I'm not going to spend. Like, you have much more risk-taking behavior because you're seeking the dopamine hit. Whereas when you're making it yourself, right, through melanin production, and you probably even notice this yourself, when you spend a lot of time in the sun, you just feel so good that almost nothing can bother you. And when something appears, like as far as like whether it's an ad or whether it's somebody trying to sell you something, you almost think about it in a different way. You almost think about it in a way of like, does this help me? Your decision making is a different decision making process than when you're in low dopamine state. And so, yeah, I think that it is on purpose. It is on purpose, and the technologies that we have are all focused on stealing dopamine from your brain.
Well, that's now with the new technologies, everything's getting closer and closer to the eyes, and you're getting the blue light closer and closer to, well,
yeah, right to your head.
Vision, the Apple Vision. That's how much closer can you get to the freaking blue light?
Yeah, and then now coincidentally, right, and the reason why I can say this, that it is being done on purpose, is because there is a company out there called Daylight Computer that knows all this, and they've gone out of their way to make a computer that doesn't have any blue light. It does not have a backlit screen that is blue. It's backlit with infrared light, and it's also reflective, so you can use it outside. Because think about not only are the technologies more blue light dominant and closer to the eye, they are actually made to not be able to be used outside, right? If you take your computer outside, it's hard to see it. Yeah. It's intentionally made that way. Because they make technology. There is technology out there that's reflective in nature that uses the sunlight itself or any light to reflect back. They on purpose don't use that. And this Daylight Computer company has resurrected that technology and is making their own tablet and computer and monitors that are actively good for you in the sense of there isn't any blue light. But not only that, if you want to use it outside, it actually works and you're able to use it outside much more efficiently. The person, I know that guy personally, the founder of it, his name is Anjan. He went to Silicon Valley and pitched this idea. They kicked him out. They said, we don't want anything to do with that.
Wow.
Right, because it literally circumvents how they make their money. Too many coincidences, right? A lot of people can say, well, it's a coincidence or that or whatever. I'm like, yeah, but here's the thing. There's a lot of really smart people. And when it comes to money and smart people are involved and the goal is to make more money, trust me, things are done on purpose, right? Like when those two things meet, smart people and their objective is to make more money through the means that they already have in place, things are not coincidental, right? We've seen that over the last 3 years. How did most politicians that passed laws and all kinds of things like that make even more money? Because they knew they were going to be passing laws that were going to mandate things, and they were invested heavily in those things, right? Where are they all invested in? They're all invested in tech. They're all invested in social media platforms. They're all invested, like they're passing laws like the law that Obama passed to reduce incandescent light bulbs and go to LED light bulbs. They're passing laws that will set them up to make even more money if you're invested in the right things. Those are not coincidences. When you follow the money, you find the truth. Let's put it that way. The easiest hacks, right? Especially people that work 9 to 5s, they have good jobs, right? They don't necessarily need to quit their job. They just need to rearrange their lifestyle to take advantage of certain times of the day, right? In the summertime, it's way easier to do this if you live in the northern hemisphere. You wake up a little bit earlier, you get some daylight, right? Like today, for example, I live in Wyoming, and at 6:30, the sun was already up, right? That's well before most people go to work. Just getting outside, getting some morning daylight in your face and in your eyes, then going to work, that already sets you up for the first half of the day to go very, very well when it comes to neurotransmitters. And then most people have a lunch, right? Most people have a lunch break. And I encourage people actively to take your lunch break and go outside, right? If you're trying to lose weight, you use that to your advantage, right? Eat your meal, go for a 10-minute walk, 15-minute walk. It'll help you with your glucose disposal. It'll help you with energy output. And at the same time, you're going to restore neurotransmitter functions to your brain and to your eyes while going outside in the middle of the day. That middle of the day one is important for the dopamine function because that's the time of the day where you're going to make melanin, right? So there's one caveat to the middle of the day is, if possible, underdressed to the point where you're at least removing your shirt if you're a man, or if you're a female, at least a workout top, so that you can get more skin exposed, because this is a game of surface area. The dopamine production is a game of surface area through the skin. The more skin area is exposed, the faster you restore dopamine function. And the beautiful thing about this is it's all light dependent, so it works very fast. Just a week of that behavior and you will feel the difference in the ability to be cognizant, less brain fog, ability to work more efficiently and things of that nature, because dopamine is at a higher level. So it doesn't take very long to start seeing that result of just those two strategies. Get out in the morning, see some daylight, and then in the middle of the day, take your lunch break, go outside, go for a walk for 10 or 15 minutes with as much skin exposed as possible. In the evening, most people don't struggle with the evening part, but it's always good to spend as little as 15 minutes, ideally a little bit more. But in the summertime, that's usually not a hard thing for most people. Most people that work a 9 to 5 will get off work and they'll have a couple hours of sunlight. And they usually spend it outside anyway, because they're either barbecuing, because of the softball games or whatever. They're usually pretty active in the summer months. So the evening is usually taken care of. But the part that is more crucial is that morning time frame to set the circadian mechanism correctly, and then the middle of the day to restore dopamine function to that. Now in the winter, this is where you got to employ some hacks of possibly some sunbeds, right? Like tanning beds. That could be helpful, especially if you live way up north, like in Canada. I would say that a strong sunbed session 2 days out of the week would be very restorative to dopamine function and to the immune system, because it will increase the immune response and vitamin D. if it's a strong sunbed. So let me qualify that for a little bit. It needs to have both UVA and UVB in order to work effectively. So I would vet the place that you're going to go to a tanning bed to make sure that they have both light bulbs in the bed. If they only have one, it doesn't work nearly as good. And like I said, most people will tend to take their vacations in the summer because that's when their kids are out of school. If you work a year-round job that keeps you indoors like that, I would highly recommend to take your vacation in the winter instead of in the summer, something like over Christmas break, right? And a lot of people kind of do that, but I would say go out of your way to do it at that point in time and go to a sunny environment. Mexico is a really cheap and easy way to get out of there because it's not a very long flight for most people, and you can always find some really good deals. It's not nearly that expensive. There's the Caribbean and things of that nature, but anywhere, and it could even stay in the United States, but there's really only two places in the United States where I would take a vacation in the winter, and that's southern Florida and southern Texas. So those are viable places within the United States that would also be beneficial for at least a week, a minimum of a week. Ideally would be closer to 2 weeks if you get 2 weeks of vacation, because that and the goal of that is to intentionally spend most of the day outside on that vacation, getting a lot of sunlight. Just 1 or 2 weeks of middle of winter sun exposure will go a long way in mental health. In fact, my wife is, how would I say, predisposed to seasonal affective disorder. She has been pretty much her whole adult life. But in the last 3 to 4 years, this is a strategy that we use. We'll go to Florida or we'll go to Texas either in December or January. And for the last 2 years, she hasn't experienced any of that. In fact, this year it was the best because we was able to go twice, once at the end of November and once in the middle of January. And she's like, this has been the best winter. She's like, I have felt zero mental health problems this whole winter long. And it's purely just from sunlight on your whole body.
That's incredible, man. It's so simple that it seems too easy to be true. And you said that for most people, they see very rapid changes in feeling better. Like if someone's suffering from very deep depression, I don't know if you ever dealt with a case like that. How fast do you see an improvement?
Within 2 to 3 weeks, right? So it depends on the environment, right? So let's take the example of you live in New York, right, for something like that, and you have you're either depressed, right? You've been clinically diagnosed and you're taking some kind of an SSRI or something like that, or this is more of a seasonal thing. Either way, if you were to go from New York to, let's just say, Florida, right? So that's a short 4-hour flight, and you spent 2 weeks in Florida. At the end of those 2 weeks, even if you are medically diagnosed depressed and you're taking SSRIs, you will feel a significant difference if you are able to get right around 3 hours of outside time, right? So something like 1 hour in the morning, 1 hour in the middle of the day, 1 hour in the evening, even as little as that, you will see a mental health uptick in your ability to just feel well in as little as 2 weeks.
And for someone who doesn't have that possibility, you mentioned the tanning beds would be a viable option twice a week. Is there anything else they can do during the day? I know, for example, you have your red light turned on while you're inside. You tend to wear blue light blocking glasses at a certain time. So any other strategies they can implement to just feel better and be better mentally?
Yeah. So in the winter, say you're not able to leave, right? You're not able to leave. Light therapies would be great, but also environmental therapies. So number one, if you're already depressed, then you start with the light therapies, right? So that would be going to a tanning bed twice a week and then ensuring some UV light. So I have this guy right here. You can probably barely see it. This is just a UVA light bulb, and then my infrared light back here. So I would set up your workspace to have some UVA and some infrared. That would be your daily dose. While you work, you have a daily dose of proper light therapy. And then twice a week, you would actually go and get pretty aggressive and try to get tan. That would be step one if you already have depression. If you already have seasonal depression or you are already taking medication for your depression, you want to start with making more melanin and then cultivating that circadian rhythm. And then you add in the secondary thing, which is the environmental stimulus, and that is cold exposure. And the reason why is because when you have plenty of melanin, right? So at the very beginning of this video, I said, when you get enough melanin or you spend enough time out in sunny part of the year,
Yeah.
you have mechanisms in place to take that melanin and continue to make neurotransmitters in the winter. That mechanism is involved with cold, right?
Okay.
So anytime your skin senses 55 degrees or lower, it actively degrades your melanin into dopamine and your other neurotransmitters, right? So if you are somebody who has already cultivated the melanin, you don't really have to do much with like sunbeds, tanning beds. You can just continue to use a little bit of UVA and infrared in your work environment indoors, but you want to get cold at 2 points in time during the day. Sometime in the first 3 hours of the day, you want to get at least 3 minutes to all the way up to 10 minutes. Past 10 minutes is unnecessary, but somewhere between 3 minutes and 10 minutes of cold exposure. My favorite, if you already live somewhere like this, you just go outside. It's free, right? It's free, and you can just go outside and underdress. Now, and this is more of like personal choice. I like that because I have exercise equipment outside. So I'll just go and get on my elliptical outside, let my skin get cold while I'm exercising. Other people won't have that access, and standing outside when it's windy and stuff like that sucks. So the next best thing I enjoy, like if I had to just stand outside, I'd rather sit in a cold plunge. So I would take a cold plunge shower or just have a cold plunge where you actively let your skin get as cold as possible for 3 minutes. And the water temperature only has to be about 55 or 50. It doesn't have to, it can be colder. It does not have to be colder. And that will induce that mechanism of taking melanin and shifting it into dopamine and into noradrenaline. And coincidentally, it will also lower blood sugar and make it so that you don't feel as lethargic throughout the day in the winter. A lot of people feel that. They feel a lot of brain fog. They feel very lethargic, especially like into, a few months into winter. Now, like I said, if you already have depression, you need to start with the light because you probably don't have enough melanin on your surfaces, whether that's your skin or inside in your nervous system, in your brain and in the nerves of the brainstem, that if you were to do the cold, you probably wouldn't find it beneficial. You would actually almost find it like it causes anxiety. And the reason for that is because your melanin goes in this step. Melanin goes to dopamine and then adrenaline and noradrenaline. When you have very little melanin, it almost skips the dopamine step. It goes right from dopamine and almost immediately goes to adrenaline and noradrenaline. Yeah. And that's why I tell people, if you get cold in the winter and your reaction is that you feel anxious for the next half hour or so, then you need more light. You need to go and get some tanning going on. If you get cold and you actually experience like an uplift, like you feel well, you feel almost euphoric, and you're like, man, I really feel awesome. That's more dopamine, right? So you have plenty of melanin to support that system, and you're making a lot of dopamine. So there's a little bit of a nuance there when it comes to just cold, or you need to have a tanning bed and then some cold. Hopefully that's clear.
Yeah, that's very clear, man. And for the people that live in sunny environments, the dopamine will be released just by itself, or do we need to do something specifically to release dopamine?
So it will be released by itself. If you're engaging in a sunny environment, you're actively making it in a surplus.
Okay.
Right. And so think of it this way, going back to the conspiracy theory thing, right? People in sunny environments are hard to rule.
Yeah.
That's why third world countries, when you're comparing them to first world countries, are in sunny environments. Why? Wow. Because people actively rebel. People actively rebel against control in sunny environments because they have a lot of dopamine and they are literally going, this is stupid. Why would I want to do that? And and guess what? They can coordinate with other people that have the same thought. You see what I'm saying? Like, when you're outside and you're in a sunny environment, you're making dopamine at a high level, and it's just naturally being released, and every day you're restoring it. You're a hard person to control at that point in time. Not only are you a hard person to control, you're also a very physically capable person, as long as you have some level of food intake, because of everything that I said about dopamine also controls motor unit coordination and things of that nature. So So yeah, in a sunny environment, you don't really have to do much other than just be outside, and you're going to make plenty of dopamine. Now, having said that, like I said, cold exposure and other things can initiate and upregulate melanin to dopamine production. So in a sunny environment, you can exploit some of these things for physical gain or mental gain or even productivity, right? Like, hey, I really have a deadline. I really got to think very clearly for the next couple of days. What can I do, right? If you're somebody who lives in a sunny environment, a little bit of cold exposure before that type of activity, and the cold exposure, the crazy thing about that, it doesn't even have to be to the whole body, right? It could be just your face, and that will upregulate melanin production at that local level. You could even do it, for example, for physical gain, right? Say you're a runner, right? Say you're a runner and you actively like to sprint and stuff like that. Getting your legs cold before a running session will also accelerate dopamine production at the calf level for making more dopamine, for more explosiveness in that local muscle tissue, things of that nature, right? So cold is a very valuable tool when you already have the dopamine. You can essentially put in cold wherever you want to accelerate the dopamine production effect. You can do that also by hypoxia. So I believe in Mexico, there's a big free diving crowd where people go out into the Caribbean and train free diving. Free diving or initiating hypoxia also moves melanin to dopamine production at a very aggressive rate. You will probably notice that most free divers are very upbeat people. They're very chill and at the same time very intense and very intelligent. And the reason for that is because they actively participate in hypoxic events. That's their training, and that actively moves melanin to dopamine. So a breath training session, like a free diving breath training session before physical activity or before mental activity, will also exploit. So it doesn't have to be just cold. Even just breath holds will initiate that.
Man, as you were speaking and saying these things, so many things in my past started clicking in my head. First thing was back in my college days where I played soccer or football. I remember that the best that I felt on the, and I lived in Texas, so summer was incredibly hot, had plenty of melanin. The best that I felt on the field was before icing both my ankles before stepping onto the field. I remember that if I iced my ankles, I felt amazing while I was playing. I didn't know why, but I just knew that it felt amazing. That's the first thing that clicked for me. The second thing was I spent a little bit of time in the Hamptons doing personal training in the winter, but it was sunny during the day. And in the morning, I took a cold shower, and I felt incredible during the day, and I had the best night's sleeps that I've ever had in my life. Mm-hmm. I don't know if the cold has some sort of mechanism that will help you sleep later on.
It does, yeah. And so that's why I said in the winter, right, when you're missing sunlight, if you already have melanin, no big deal. Just start using cold exposure at 2 times of the day, in the morning and then in the evening. We talked a little bit about the morning one, which is everything that we just highlighted. It exploits melanin into dopamine. Now, cold in the morning also tells the central climactic nucleus, the CNS, to ignore any light input for the next few hours, like 6 to 8 hours. So that means that the artificial lights that you're going to be working in will have less impact on you after the cold exposure in the morning, right? Now, in the evening, you'll get cold once again. And what that will do is that will accelerate serotonin being moved to melatonin. So in other words, you will produce more melatonin when you get cold in the evening, only if the light is dim. In other words, this will not work if you have all your artificial blue lights on. It only works when you reduce it. Mainly if you have red lights on or amber lights on in the background. It doesn't mean it has to be zero. It works even better if there's zero light, but it doesn't have to be zero light. It can just be orange light bulbs, red light bulbs. If you get cold in the evening, absent of blue light, melatonin will get skyrocketed. And that I use that one a lot because a lot of people in the winter, about halfway through winter, they start to sleep poorly. And the reason for that is there isn't a switch anymore because the day no longer has a rhythm, right? You're indoors all day and you go to work, it's dark. You come home from work, it's dark. Your body never actually understood when is it actually nighttime? Is it permanently nighttime or is it permanently daytime? We don't know. That's where the cold comes in. Your skin is part of your brain, right? So I'm not sure we talked about this before, but your skin comes from the same tissue when you're a fetus in the womb. It's the same tissue as your brain. What it does is it splits, and then the skin forms the outside of you, and the brain stays in your skull. But because they came from the same tissue, atoms in your brain and atoms in your skin are identical. So in other words, they wirelessly communicates to your brain. So when the skin senses cold in the morning and then cold again in the evening, 12 hours later, it helps the central climactic nucleus know when does the day start and when does the day end. Because if you look at just a temperature range, like if you just looked at the weather of one day, the temperature is cold at 2 points in the day.
Yeah.
Even if it's snowing and cloudy, it'll be in the morning and it'll be in the evening. So when your skin senses the two coldest points in time, hey, this is when it was cold and this is when it was cold, then it knows this is the start of the day, this is the end of the day. And so it starts doing things appropriately once again. And it starts to tune the circadian mechanism.
This is so freaking interesting. I love it, man. Thank you so much for the time. Do you have any other recommendations for someone who's listening to this and wants to improve their life as much as possible?
Yes. So there would be one recommendation. These mechanisms, sunlight and cold, work the best when you have a high amount of DHA in your cell membranes.
Okay.
Right? Now, I know your audience is vegan, but I would highly encourage to at least support a supplemental DHA intake, if not an outright oyster crustacean type diet, right? Or introduction to that diet. That would be the one thing, because if you are deficient in DHA, these inputs need to come up. In other words, 1 or 2 hours of sunlight no longer do the same as when you have high DHA versus low DHA. You would need more sunlight to accomplish the same effect. Okay. Same thing with the cold. 10 or 15 minutes of cold in the morning doesn't work as good when you have low DHA in your tissues versus high DHA. That's the only thing that is nutritional in nature that does have a significant impact on how the environment acts on your brain.
Would a supplement of algae be sufficient, a DHA supplement?
It would be better than nothing, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, like 100%. I would say, that's why I say at least consider a supplemental form of DHA. If you're not going to go all out with something like oysters or clams or things of that nature. But at least a supplemental, whether that's algae, whether that's krill oil, something along those lines would be better than nothing, is what I would say for sure.
So if someone is interested in continuing to learn about this topics, where can they? I'll link your Instagram below, but is there anything else, like if someone wants to reach out to you, do a consultation?
Yeah. So I have actually started a school group, right? Okay. A school group, and that is found in the Solar Athlete Instagram. If you become a monthly member, not only will you get videos and podcasts that I do regularly, weekly, you will also get one-on-one support with specific questions for you. It's basically a community for this type of talk, right? And nothing's off the table. It could be anything from financial rhetoric of like, how do you protect yourself against being manipulated by governments and things of that nature, all the way to how do you help make yourself feel better, right? And all of those things. And then there's the typical stuff, right? Training, diet, things of that nature. But nothing's off the table. That is the easiest, where you don't have to necessarily work with me one-on-one, but you are there and I am accessible to you essentially for just that price.
Amazing. I'll drop the link in the description if someone wants easy access for that. David, thank you so much for the time. This was incredibly interesting. I got so many more topics that I want to talk about with you, but I guess
Awesome.
those for another time. And yeah, man, really appreciate the time, and thank you for bringing the wisdom and the ideas to improve your mental health and your physical health.